Alright, welcome back everyone. What I'm doing right now is getting set up to go over Napoleon, 4th edition by Columbia Games. We did an unboxing a little while ago where we looked at all the components. Here's the cover. And so what we're going to do now is lay the game out and go over some different concepts for you. This is what it looks like before you set it up. So I've got the blocks. Now, part of the setup, there are some rules on how to set up, but what I'm going to do after I put this up is I'm going to use the actual historical deployment chart. That's what this is. Now, you also got one for the British and the Prussians. The way this works is so easy. Now, there are rules for setup if you want to do your own. So if you get tired of doing historical setup, there's deployment lines here on the map that kind of set restrictions on where the British can deploy, where Prussians can deploy, or you can just simply use the historical setup. It just tells you right here. Here's Wellington's Reserve Corps. They'll be in Brussels, and it tells you exactly what you're going to put in Brussels. Easy. All right, so that's what we're going to do. We're going to set up the British. Same thing. Got Napoleon's Guard and all these different units. Alright, so I'll be back in a moment after I have it all set up. That's what it looks like right now. Just threw up on there. Now, we've done some deployment. What I wanted to show you though, which is real important, it says for the Allied deployment, Allied deploy a maximum strength in towns of their choice, north of Franco-Netherland border. And that's all marked on the map. But see, it says right here, Prussian units must deploy east of that line. No more than 4 units can deploy in any town. Okay, so the British are good. They can deploy, and we actually have them out here. You can see, according to the deployment chart, we've got British here in Brussels. I can't pronounce a lot of these places, so forgive me. We've got our units here in Braine-le-Comte. We have here in Ath, and then over here in Ninove, and then Brussels. And they're fine because it says they can deploy in max strength. Now over here though, for the Prussians, with our deployment map, we're already in a bit of a tight spot. Right back here though, there are 4 in Liège. We've got 4 here in Kinney. Then right here, 5 in Namur. And then 5 right over here in Charleroi. And it says then if you have more, just move anybody over to an adjacent city. That's the first excruciating choice that you have as the Allied player. That's devastating because it just means more work to try and bring everyone together. So I'm going to take one of my infantry units here. I'm going to move that over here to Foss. So now I've got the 4 that I need. I've got my 1 overflow unit here. Here's 5. I'm going to move an infantry up to Yvors. So this way I have the legal amount. And so we're kind of spread there. There's our little wall. This is, I'm going to tell you, the first thing that makes this game feel very strategic, right? That's what it is. It's a strategy game. So with your overboard, the Overland map, one of the things that you're going to notice is there's no hexes. So if you're not familiar with the game or have seen it before, this is actually very, very cool because it feels like you're playing on a map and you're moving from city to city. So this is now like a point area movement game. With that in mind, this puts the British and the Prussian army, the Allies, at a serious disadvantage. Because as you can see right through here, the French have a nice, strong deployment. You know, they're ready to pounce. And then the Allies are just kind of spread out. So one of the biggest things that this game does, this is more of a troop and resource management game as much as it is a game with battle elements. So that's the first of the many excruciating choices you have to make as the Allies is where do I put those extra pieces, right? So I had to move stuff to adjacent towns. and that would be a deployment. Now, the game itself is actually fairly easy. So again, when we did the unboxing, we looked here, let me just open this up. You have a grand total of 8 pages, but there's 3 columns, but a lot of the pages only have 2 columns worth of information, and the flow of the game is actually really easy. So you got your intro, and you have your sequence of play. So it alternates, so one player will go do all of his actions and moves, and then the other player goes, and in fact you have down here this chart that tells you that, you know, on June 15th you have the French, then the Allies, then a French night move. So it kind of walks you through this alternating play sequence. And there's movement, then you have battle, and then there's supply and defeat. Alright, then, you know, battle is broken down. So we'll kind of look at those steps a little bit more in depth here. So what we're looking at then is when we battle, we actually have tactical maps that we'll look at. And this you actually could end up with like a whole bunch of battles going on at once. I try to keep it simple because it's a one-person show, which means I do a lot of solo play for this. And it's tough. This is a really tough one for solo. The mechanics, yes, are easy for solo, but really trying to strategize and plot movements is tough because I know what I'm thinking. So it's like, okay, it is tough because there's a lot of choices to make as the allies. So one thing I've done is I have all of the pieces facing me. Right? Normally, you're going to sit across from your opponent and their turn. That's one of the great things about the block games is they have a built-in fog of war. And so I can be moving artillery and infantry around, and yes, I could see troop movements of my opponent, but if it was a face-to-face game, I wouldn't know exactly what they're moving. Here I kind of have an idea. So some of that element of friction is lost when I play solo. Now what you could do for solo play, and this would work, I got the idea from the combat infantry, is lay it out just like you would a normal game, have your opponent's pieces facing away from you, and what you got to do is just go back and forth to other side of the table. So when you're doing, the French, sit on the French side of the table, and you have an idea then of where some of the Allies stuff is, but when it's the Allies' turns to move and do things, you just go to the other side of the table and then play, and then you'll somewhat remember what all the French stuff is, but it gives you a little bit of that fog of war. So that's, the game is that easy, right? Move, combat, check for victory. Well, let's talk about movement then. I think we'll move into the map so we can look at movement a little bit more. Alright, we've hopped down onto the map just so we can see things. And right now we've got all the units facing up, right? So you can't quite see what they are. But the way you move is actually fairly simple. Basically, you're going to move from one town to the next town. Now, if you have cavalry can go 2 spots, and then the leaders like Napoleon, they could do 2 towns. And that's the beauty of this, because you're playing on like a map, and you're at kind of that strategic level. There's no worry about terrain, right? There's no mountains, there's no the woods, the markings on the map mean nothing. And I'm just going to point out, this is a beautiful aspect of the game. There are no combat charts, terrain effect charts, or anything like that. Everything you need is on these pieces, and then the movement is just regulated by your ability to move from town to town. So here we have, this is Napoleon, his French Guard, and then the 3rd Corps are with him, and they are here in Beaumont. That might not be pronounced right, but they're in Beaumont. And then I've got some troops over here. These folks are in Philippeville, and then over here I got a bunch of folks in Soirée. So as the British, or as the French player, I'm thinking, well, do I just wait for the Allies to come to me, or do I branch out and start to attack? This is why the game is difficult, is deciding what to do. But just to demonstrate, obviously as you play, you're going to start to develop your strategies and whatnot. But I'm going to start, let's move out, because if I can throw the Allies off balance by pressing attacks before they can consolidate everything, that puts me in a very strong advantage, because in combat, you want to be massed. So how does the movement work? you're going to take a group and just pick that group up and move it adjacent to the next town. Now, you're limited by your roads. Now, if you can see, if I just move my French center, here you have Beaumont. Now, you've got two types of roads. You have these rather thick roads, those are major roads, and these thinner roads, these are the minor roads. Now, with that, I can move up to 8 troops along a major road, and then that road is done, right? We've clogged it up with traffic. Minor roads, you can move 6. So right here from Beaumont, we actually start with 10 troops. So I would have to kind of consider then, do I move up here to Thuin so I can be prepared to receive attacks or make my own attack? Or, you know, do I even move anything? Next we have Soiree, and it'd be the same thing. You know, do I want to move? So I could take this major road and move out here to Mons and take that. That might be something. And so that's a major road. That means I can move 8 units. So I'm just going to take those, and here we'll shift this up. You can look. And we're going to follow this road and right here to Mons. Boom. There we are. Now that is considered a group move. And I still, if I wanted to, if I had troops adjacent, I could move 2 more into that town if I had troops along this road. But overall, I could have as many people in a town as I want. I just have to watch the road limitation. I don't have anything adjacent to move more troops here, so we'll just say I move here. I now own that town. That's my town. And since the French are aggressive, let's say we want to move up to Thuin. That's a minor road, so I'm going to take 6 units. I'm going to take, now in here I've got 3rd Corps and a lot of my guard units. I'm actually just going to send a bunch of guard units from Beaumont up to Thuin. I'm going to leave Napoleon behind immediately. So I can take 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We'll just take all the guard. So we'll say Napoleon deploys his guard and they push up. Now, later I could bring Napoleon up if I wanted. And that leaves 4 units here. Now, I mean, I could still move these somewhere. Well, let's see, what do we got here? We got this group down here, which you cannot see. You can see now. There's a bunch of people there. And they're in Philippeville. Well, I think that might be enough movement. But that's how you do movement. Now, you can move into an enemy-occupied town, at which case that's now going to switch the game over to the tactical battle value. But as far as just moving, folks, as long as you're meeting the road requirements, you're okay. Now, there is one slight exception, and that's across rivers. Rivers have these bridges, and you're limited to how many people can cross that bridge in order to move into combat. Now, as far as just moving across a river to go to a town, there's no limitation. But if you attack across, that means if I had, for example, you know, these guys here, and they want to cross the river, and if there were enemy units, like if these guys were here in Lenef, I would be limited to only moving three troops across the river on that minor road. If it was crossing a bridge on a major road, then I could move 4. So that's really the only thing you need to worry about as far as moving on the Overland. And that's why I'm saying this is a really good system for like beginners. The challenge just becomes in how do you want to move your troops and the troop management. Now, with the French, they get 2 moves, right? And they have to decide, you know, am I taking major roads, minor roads, what cities do I want to reinforce, which will explain why that's an important aspect too here in a moment. But you get 2 group moves per turn segment, if you will. Now, the Allies also get 2 move segments. So after the French, now the game doesn't come with like a traditional turn tracker. Well, we have the tracker, but I don't have like an actual, you know, something I move along. So the game I had, my copy had like an extra block of each color. So I'm just going to use like a red block. So I know the French moved. I did my 2 moves with the French. Now, I would just advance this to the Allies. Now the Allies also get 2 moves, but they're just a little bit different because there's two troops, right? I have Prussians and the British. That means the Prussians get to move a group and the British get to move a group. So yeah, the Allies still get 2 movement segments, but you can't do 2 Prussian moves. Even if you had a mixed town, which the Allies can mix, if I move the British unit, then I would still be limited to just 1 Prussian move somewhere else. So that's just kind of the thing you have to worry about with your allies. See, that's another disadvantage to the allies, is they have to coordinate their movements between each other. All right, so we're moving, right? Let's say, for the sake of argument, I moved here. I guess it's not an argument, right? But I actually moved some folks here. Now, one thing that could happen in the future is if I move these back to soiree, so maybe I just move these 3 up. And now let's say another turn has gone by and it's time to move units. If the French player move units up, what I do is if I move units into a town that already had friendly troops, a lot of times what I'll do is I'll just put those units face down momentarily. And the reason why is because if I was then to do my second move and I'd want to move people out, I just want to make sure I'm not moving extra people. My second move would be all these folks, because you technically can, there is a rule that says you can force march with units. So let's say my first move is I brought these guys in as reinforcements to Mons, and then from Mons I move them out to this Luez, for example. Well, after all the movement is done, all the French have gone, all the Prussians have done their regular movements, you can now do forced marches, and that's anybody who has moved 1 can now do a second advance. So I could, if I wanted to, now do my forced march with these guys. And that's why I just kind of flip these so I know they've already marched once. So 1, they're not going to move with this other group. They will actually have to do a forced march if they wanted to keep up with that group here. The only problem with a forced march is after the march is done, you roll, because there's a chance that you could take some casualties on your guys. So I'll just see here the forced marches. It's really easy to find all the rules. They're just like right in each section, movement, forced marches. So you roll a die 6, and the unit completes the move, but permanently could lose some troops. Okay, so just be aware of that. Yes, there is a movement segment. You can do a forced march, but then you could take some casualties. So that's pretty much the basics there on movement. Now, on your turn track, you'll notice, though, that after the French have gone and then after the British have gone, there's a night phase. And the night phase also alternates. So during the night phase, you can move, but there's no forced marches, and you can't move into combat. So you could do a little more shuffling of troops around at night. So as you can see, this again is another disadvantage to the Allies. Now, how does this play into combat? Well, we'll talk about combat here in just a second, and the importance of setting up your cities for combat. Alright, so now we're prepping up for the other aspect of the game, and that would be combat. Now, in the first couple turns of the game, I think most people, and I'm just speaking for myself, you're probably going to focus on moving troops up. Like, see, I've got my British here in their initial positions, but it's tough if you can only move 1 group. So along a major road, like I'm trying to bring folks up, so I might bring folks to Waterloo, right? Because I'm trying to shift this way to meet the French, and the French are moving up so they can engage. But let's just say we happen to get one of those engagements. Now, for example, we have Thuin here, and if it's the French, I'm on a minor road, and there is a bridge, and let's say I want to bring up, I have here in this stack, I've got a cannon, infantry, and another infantry. Okay, so that's 4. Then here, typically I wouldn't be able to see what the Prussians had there in Charleroi, but I know it's got a horse cavalry, a horse artillery, it's got regular artillery, and then it's got 2 infantry. Now, that's, fairly equal. Cannons aren't that spectacular as far as a game changer. That might not be a good thing to say, but I have found that infantry tend to kind of really rule the battlefield a lot of times. Artillery does have a great use if it can get long-range shots, but we'll show that in a minute. But that's still not an overwhelming fight. One of the things that you've really got to do when you attack is you need to commit to the attack, and that means commit a lot of people. So when you're setting up and doing your initial strategy movements, what you want to do is get it set up so that you have adjacent troops in adjacent cities. So let's say the French in another move have moved some folks up here up to Theria. Now when I go to do my attack, and let's say I'm going to move in, 2 group moves for instance, I can move from 2 adjacent cities to an adjacent enemy unit, as long as there's a connecting road between these 2 allied cities. So there's actually a road that goes from Thuin and a road that goes here to La Nef, and then La Nef and Thuin are both adjacent here to Charleroi. So let's say the French then want to attack. Well, there's a bridge, so from Thuin across a minor road to a bridge, I can move 4 people. So I'm going to move 4 people up. Now I'm just knocking my people off here. From La Nef, I have a major road, and that would go straight into their town, and that would let me take these 5. So I'm going to commit these 2 units to fight. Now, that's fine. One thing that the Prussians have, though, is they do have this guy over here in Foss, who is adjacent by road. Now, he will be able to reinforce the battle later. That's the key, is 1, you want to have enough people that you can move forward so that you have a lot more attackers than defenders. That makes sense. Also, you want to have it set up to where you've got potential reinforcements to keep the battle going. So for example, again, these are all examples. If I had some people up here in Bench or Benchay, what I could do as the battle progresses is they have a road that comes here to this town as well. So later in the game, if things weren't going well, I could actually pull adjacent reinforcements from an adjacent town and have those go to the fight. And I'm just going to say before we look at combat, that's where this game gets really deep. That's why I'm saying this is like a force management, resource management kind of game. Is how do I coordinate the Prussians and the British who only get 1 move versus the French who get 2. Now, yeah, that's every side gets 2 moves, but the Prussian player is like, I only get to move 1 group. And that's the British guy. I only get to move 1 group. So it becomes very difficult sometimes to coordinate. And I'm just going to take a sidetrack here. So when I first started this game, I don't know much about Napoleonic history. All right, I know you're probably tired of looking at this one static picture. Let's move here. Here's some other units to look at. This is the Napoleonic campaign. So we're going to go from battles that some games do individually. So there's Quatre-Bras. There's, let's see, there was Ligny on here. Let's see, probably covered it up. Where's Ligny? That's Liege. Well, there's Quatre-Bras, Waterloo, Waver, or Wavre. I don't know how you pronounce it. I'm so sorry. I thought on here was Ligny. I'm covering it up. Well, that's what you get for not knowing. Sorry, public school education. But on here was like Ligny, and these are names that I've heard mentioned as battles, and then that leads up to like the big battle up here, like at Waterloo. And I could actually see how the battle at Waterloo would be important because, oh, here's Ligny. So there's like the individual battles that some games do, you know, as their whole game. These cover all that because it's possible that you could end up with troops battling at Waterloo, because there's Waterloo right there. Now, my understanding of Waterloo, and this is why this game, I think, is narratively super, super good. If I did have my French pushing forward, and then I've got a British force to meet them at Waterloo, I would also need to have Prussians in an adjacent city, because once the battle starts up here at Waterloo, just like in the real battle, right, there was a lot of fighting until the Prussian reinforcements arrived. And those types of things could actually play out here. Now, obviously, the tactical combat would be a little bit different, but this is the part that really got me thinking, what an amazing gem this is. You need to put a lot of thought into how to move your troops. I know I've mentioned that a lot of times, because when I first started playing, that honestly did not stand out to me as a thing. A lot of games, tactically, I just move troops up. And this game actually has two elements. There's your strategic map element, and that plays a lot different than a tactical game. And we'll go look at tactical combat here in a moment. Now, my son and I, we play computer games. One of the games we play is called Total War. Total War is a series of computer games that have a similar setup. You have a strategic map, and then when the armies clash, you go to a tactical map and you get to see the individual soldiers fight. That's what I'm looking at here. First, this is the strategic map element where I'm moving my troops and setting them up. That's what you're doing. A lot of this is pre-planning, and chess would be another great example. You've got to be thinking several moves ahead. So if I see French troops moving here, I don't necessarily have to press the attack, but what I want to do, like let's look up here. If I see I've got French here in Mons, right here, and I've got French here in Lisway, these two guys are connected by a town and each have a road going here. I could attack. Now, if I'm the British player and I see that, well, by themselves, that can get slaughtered if I've got 6 coming in. But the French might be less likely to attack because right here are British reinforcements who could come up. Now, there is a skirmish rule thing where there's a set of skirmish rules where if you come to battle and only one side has 3 or fewer troops, then it's not a battle, it's a skirmish, and the skirmishers usually end up retreating. But we're not going to cover that. This just here will make it look legit. 4 people. And let's say I had, over time, moved more British. And let's say Napoleon himself is over here. Right? So they could attack. But if I am also considering how to reinforce these things, the French might be less likely to attack because I've got all these reinforcing. I just can't begin to tell you how amazing that makes this, and why I struggle as a player, because as a single player, I see everything that I'm doing, and I just end up lining a lot of people across from each other at some point, and then they advance. But if you're playing, then you have an opponent who is really going to give you that kind of a chance to spread out and see what you can do, and only because I know what's in each city, right? Because I play seeing. I know that I've got infantry and who's here. But yeah, the Overland strategy part of this game is just amazing. So how do we translate this now into a fight? Well, let's say I do my 2 moves, and I move this French up. Now, I don't have to move this group. I could say this guy will attack, and then I'm going to bring these on as reinforcements. But let's just say they all go, all or nothing. Now, this is where you could end up with multiple fights going on. Let's say this was, looking at my turn tracker here, and I've got, it's a French move. Let's say it's June 16th. Well, here, June 17th. I did French, and then I do Allies. Well, now the Allies already pushed some stuff up here. But the Allies, let's say they moved into this town. Whoops. And they could move into a town and start an attack. And then with my second Allied move, if I could, I maybe move the French up. So now in a way, I have initiated 3 battles, and there would be no more movement until all the battles have been resolved, whether through its destruction of enemy troops, they've retreated off the field, whatever the case may be, all overland movement turns stop. And that's why it's important before you initiate combat that you've got all your troops set up as to which ones will be in adjacent towns so you can use them as reinforcements later in the game during that particular battle. Okay, so I think we've covered battle, or at least, movement, pretty good, pretty thorough. Let's go ahead, move over to a tactical map, and now talk about combat. Alright, so the game comes with these 2 battle maps. So you're going to have your left, center, right, reserve, and then the opposing forces have the same thing. Before you place anybody, what you got to do is draw some terrain. Now it says the attacker is going to draw first, so I'm going to reach into my random bag and I draw a river or a stream. Okay, so this is going to place on a line between, and that kind of gives you an obstacle. Now the book, easy enough, actually has a nice little rundown of the different terrain types. So stream, place terrain marker on the middle ground line between the 2 opposing positions where it is an obstacle to both players. Per battle turn, a maximum of 2 units may cross the stream to engage, or 2 to disengage, or 1 of each. So you can have like 1 guy move in, 1 guy move out. Units in excess of this limit due to morale failure are eliminated. So yeah, morale is something we'll talk about, but if you ended up having to have, say, 3 troops disengage for morale, well, you would lose 1 because only 2 could cross the river. So we'll put a stream right here in the center. Then the defender draws 2. So I got them here in the bag, so I just reach in and I'm going to pull 2 blocks. What else do we have? We have woods, and then we have a hill. Woods really offer protection for infantry, and it basically prevents cannons from deploying in the woods, doesn't let cannons shoot from woods, and doesn't let cannons shoot into woods, essentially. And then horses, I'd say horses, but the cavalry, when they attack troops that are in the woods, infantry in woods, they don't get their initial shock value attack. And then we have a hill. So basically, if I've got an artillery unit shooting on a hill, they get a +1 to their firepower on long range because they're now shooting down onto targets. And then I just decide where I want to put them. So as the defender, I'm going to say, I want my artillery here in the right flank, and I'll put the woods over here in the left. So that's the terrain. Once the terrain has been set up, we then have to deploy troops. Now it does say the defender will place first and then the attacker. Now over here on the map, I have a sample I did earlier where I've got a bunch of British that were in one town. They're going to be the defender because the French moved up. Now one thing is when you move a battle from a city, let me just zoom over because it's like right there. What I do is I take one of my unpainted block, one of my unstickered blocks, and I just stick it on the city. So I know that there's a big battle going on in Ath right now. And the British were the defenders, so I pulled them out. And in a minute, I'm going to move up my several units of British. So let's take a look back here. Now, when you are setting up your battle, you got to put at least one in each spot. So I have artillery. I'm going to leave the artillery in reserve. I'm going to place a infantry here, and I'm going to place, it's not good, I'm going to put an artillery on the right flank, and I'm going to leave infantry here in the center. The reason why I left this in reserve is because this will let me kind of see where the French are deploying, so I might be able to move the cannon up somewhere. Now the French will then get to deploy. Now when you play with a face-to-face opponent, these are actually going to be laid down because now you can see who you're facing. But in the reserve, you could leave that face up and away. So they still get to remain hidden. But since I play solo a lot of times, everything just stays up and it faces me. Just like that. Then the French deploy. I brought Napoleon, so I'm going to put Napoleon in the reserve. I've got, let's see here, second corps. Now this is an important thing. When you look at the counters, you have some important pieces of information. One, you have the initial corps that they belong to. And they're going to look at that for purposes of the initial setup, because the setup chart tells you which corps goes to what town. So I just know all of number 2 corps, is going to be in a certain town. When you deploy to your battle map, you can't mix your corps on the left, center, or right. So for example, I also had in there 3rd Corps. Well, 3rd Corps can't deploy over here with 2nd Corps. So I'd have to put maybe 3rd Corps here, over here, or in the reserve. Let me see if I had any other 3rd Corps. No, but I had another 2nd Corps. So I put 3 of my 2nd Corps. I'm going to put my lone 3rd Corps. I don't know how he got it by himself, but he's going to be back here with Napoleon. I then have 3 infantry from the 1st Corps, so I'll put them there. And then I have, just demonstrating things, I've got a really odd mixture. Now I have a guard artillery and then a 6th Corps foot artillery. So what I'm going to do is put my 3rd Corps infantry here. And I'm going to put them in the woods. And I'm going to put this artillery on the hill. Alright, so there you go. That would be the French deployment. Now, already you can see overwhelming amount of troops against the British. This was not a good setup by the British. However, the strength that the British have is that, remember, they had behind them 2 adjacent cities full of additional units. So that might come in handy. The French, on the other hand, have no adjacent cities with reserve units. They brought everything to the field. So we'd have to see how this plays out. Now, after deployment and once the battle starts, I can move my corps to different areas. Then they can mix and match. It's just on the deployment you have to worry about which corps is covering which flank, if they're in the center, left, or right flank. But once the combat gets going, they're running. Now, they have let's see here, what's the optional rule? All units remain hidden. Okay, so there's like a fog of war thing. So the fog of war just applies to the units in the reserve. Otherwise, you could play the optional rule where everything is hidden. That means upright away from your opponent until they shoot. Then you could lay it down and the opponent would know, okay, where's the cannon? So again, because I'm solo, I just keep everything up facing me. So once we have our units, we've deployed them, we've got our corps integrity, we know who's in reserve. Now we can start alternating the combat. The attacker goes first, but one of the things I have to do is if any of these units were strength 1, I would have to make a morale check. Well, how do I know? What does that mean? Now, another cool thing then about these squares is you have this number. That's their strength. This represents, I forget, I had to look it up, but this is like a couple thousand men when it comes to the infantry. And so as they take damage, they just rotate. So eventually there's just strength of 1. What this strength number does is it tells you how many dice 6 you roll when you make your attack. And this F1, firepower 1, that tells me what I need to roll on the dice to score a hit. So this unit at full strength rolls 3 dice 6 and hits on 1s. Now, if I'm starting my turn and I've got some units on morale of 1 or strength of 1, I make a morale check to see if they stay and fight. Well, since this would be, say, quote unquote, the first turn of battle, I don't have any morale 1 type of things. If you had leaders, that could affect morale, but we're not going to worry about that. Now you can move. Now the way you move is pretty simple. A cavalry, and I have no cavalry, this is all infantry and artillery. Horse cavalry and cavalry can move 2 squares. Well, I say squares, but they move 2 sections. Infantry move 1 section. Artillery kind of moves 1 section. Now the thing is, you cannot move and attack. Alright, that's kind of a drawback. Now the cavalry, they can, though, for example, because they get 2 movements. So if I had cavalry, which I have none, they could move and then they would attack and they get a bonus on their attack. I just don't have any. I guess I could move one in. Let me grab one. Let's just say I had a cavalry. Oh, here's one. And I denote cavalry because it has a C for cavalry. Yay. So I would actually have to deploy them from the reserve. 1, 2. Well, if their second move was to move up, then they probably wouldn't get to fight. Yeah, cavalry is kind of fun. All right. So let's show you some things that you could do. Now the book, rule book, has some good examples of what it means to engage and go across and do things. Okay, yeah, I got excited. I was a little wrong. So you don't, like the cavalry, for instance, they can't move in and then attack that turn. But what it means is they can move 2 spots. So if I had cavalry in reserve, I could move them here, say, to the right flank, and then they could move to the left. That means they're now engaged. They're in the same spot as an enemy. Infantry, for example, they can move up 1, and now they would be engaged and could fight. But the thing is, you can't fire if you've moved. So this is the drawback for the attacker. The attacker has to be very careful about why they have to, who they bring to battle, because the defender essentially gets to shoot first. So if I'm in this situation, I could say move. So let's say I'm going to move up 2 infantry, so they're engaged with this infantry. I might not want to do that because, see, cannons, they can shoot long range, but they can't shoot into a unit that's got friendlies as well. So let's leave that there for a moment. In this center, we've got 1 infantry. Now there's a stream, so I can only move 2 infantry across. So I've got a cannon. Well, since I've got a cannon here in the center, I might wait until the cannon attacks and see if I can damage them a little bit before I cross the stream. So I'll leave those infantry there. So I've got infantry over here, and he could move out of the woods to attack this cannon. That's a thought. Then what I could do is take my cavalry and move it here, and then move it up here. So now we've got infantry and cavalry to deal. Now, the thing is, if I wanted to move, say, from the center over here to the left, you can't move laterally. I would actually have to move to the reserves, and then from the reserves, I could move to any of these spots. So it's a little bit tricky. That's why when you're setting up, sometimes it's real tricky deciding where you're going to place people to begin with. The other advantage to placing people in the reserve is they cannot be attacked, and they cannot attack from. So they remain hidden, and they're kind of off the board in a way, but they can deploy anywhere they need to. So let's say this is what I've done. I've moved up 2 infantry. I'm going to leave the cannon to shoot, because he can't shoot if friendly troops are engaged, and this cannon is going to shoot, and that would be long distance fire. Okay, so that would take us to the next part, which then would be firing. Now, to fire, again, you look at your strength, and that's how many dice you roll. Now, I'm going to do the cannons. Now, at long range, they fire as normal, okay? But if you go to short range, the very first shot that cannon do is they get a +1 to the firepower, because they're shooting like grape shot and canister rounds, and like just turn their cannon into a big shotgun. But what I'm going to do is just use the long range. Now, this says 1 artillery +1. So we're on the hill. And if we go back to the terrain, it says 1 defending artillery has +1 fire. Okay, well, that's important too. So that means even though I'm on a hill, when I attack, I don't get a +1 to my firepower. See, it's just, this is a thing. There's all these little things that I never quite remember, so I always go back to the rules to try and catch things. And that's not because the game is difficult. It's me. It's an Eddie thing. But I'm going to look here. I got 3 strength, so I'm going to roll 3 dice. And I hit on 1. So this 5 and the 6 that I rolled are a miss. But that's 1 is a hit. So the cannon fires at long range. It scores 1 hit. Damage is immediate. So combat's not like simultaneous. So when the attacker shoots, that damage happens now. Okay? Now, I have another cannon here. So he's going to shoot. It's cannon of strength, but it's also 1 firepower. Oh, that's 665. So that cannon did nothing. Now, if you wanted to remember that you fired, you could well, you don't want to rotate those too much, but I was going to say maybe you could flip it upside down. Normally, I don't have any trouble remembering who's done what. So what I do sometimes, I just move these over off to the side so I know that they've done something, and then these guys here are left. But they can't fire because they have no long range. That's all my cannons. And I didn't do any reserve move. I did move up here, but see, now it would be the defender's turn to do something because they're on the defense. They don't want to move. They don't want to move. They're going to shoot because they've got a couple of people in their section. But here's the bad thing. I've also got this artillery. If it is destroyed, then the French could essentially rout this battle, because if you have an area that gets eliminated of all your, of one color, basically the other color wins and routs the army. So for example, if I'm the defender and I just have 2 French left, that means the British is going to rout. So what I might want to do is move that cannon up. So let's see. Can we engage with artillery? No. See, so we got a big disadvantage here. Foot artillery cannot engage. Cavalry artillery can engage, but foot can't. So I've got nothing here. So if that dies, the French are going to win. Well, let's roll some dice. So the French, remember, they get a +1 firepower for the first shot because artillery gets, they're firing like grape shot. So if I roll, I have a 1 and I got a 2. That's okay because this is firepower 2 already. So it scored 2 cannon hits. Now, the way you take off hits is you take the hits off the strongest unit first. If they're tied, then you decide which one takes the hits. And essentially, you just take hits off so that they remain equal strength, if you will. Both of these only have 2 strength, so they take 1, and they take 1. So the cavalry take a little bit of a hit, and the infantry took a little bit of hit from that grape shot. That's really good. That's also really good for the British because now, the next time the French do something, they have to make morale checks to see if they continue fighting. There you go. That is a turn. The attackers went, the defenders did something. Now you check for reinforcements. As the last step in each battle turn, a player, now the French, I didn't have reinforcements from another town, but the British do. So as the last step for the British player on their particular segment, they can move in units from adjacent towns that themselves are not in battle. And they get to add to the reserve, which then can be brought in. But you're limited by how many you can bring. So if we come back over here to the strategic map, I had these towns with my British reinforcements. And they can bring in 1 unit by a minor road or 2 units by a major road. So let's see. We need some infantry big time. So I'm going to bring in these 2 infantry from Ingheim, so they would come across. I'll put them in reserve. I got a minor road here, so I could bring in 2 more. Let's see, I already got enough artillery. So let's bring, this is all cavalry. Now if we come back to the tactical map, there we go. Now, look at that. The British now have a much stronger foothold on this battle than what we had previously. So as long as the French don't eradicate this artillery unit, then the British will be able to reinforce anywhere they need because they're weak all across the front here. So after you do reinforcement, the combat losses you assign as you take combat. Let's see here. Just that's pretty much it. Now they do have rules for square, putting your infantry in square against cavalry, but this is the basis of combat. See, that's what I'm saying. The overall mechanics of the game are really simple. Move, but then you just have a few restrictions to movement, like road size or attacking across a bridge. Combat is pretty simple too. You deploy, and then you either move units up to engage in combat, or stay where you are and shoot artillery, or be on the receiving end of engagements and make your roles as a defender. I mean, it is that easy. But there's just those little things that you got to remember sometimes. Like, I can only have 2 come across a road, a minor road for. Oh, you know what? I already messed up. Those were minor roads, so they should only get one. See, I just got done reading that to you, and I just made a mistake. Because it's those little things that sometimes gets me. But that's the basics of the game. Yeah, I know. Now I'm going to look back at the video and be like, oh, okay, yeah. So one unit can cross a minor road, proceeds to move 2 units. That's kind of that's just the way I play. We would call that cheating, but when you play against yourself, is it really cheating at that point? But when you catch the mistakes and fix it, I guess then it's not so bad. But if you have like multiple battles, the game says what you do is you do 1 complete turn in 1 battle. So we would leave this battle here. Then you go do another battle, finish that. So like if on my strategic map, we technically could have a battle going on here and a battle going on here. I would probably need another battle map because the game only comes with 2. But you theoretically, according to the game, could have unlimited amounts of battles going on. You would just have to resolve 1 turn in each battle and cycle through until 1 battle was complete. Once all battles are complete, then you would go back to your movement segment. So how do I know when a battle's complete? Well, okay, so we did 1 turn here. Let's do another turn. So the French, I look to see, do I want to move anything before I do the combat? No, they're fine. They are going to shoot again. That's what I say. Artillery is good, but it's not super good. You're probably better if you could get some, your own infantry up there. So what I'm going to do is leave this cannon here, and I'm going to move up. I'm going to keep Napoleon. Now remember, because it's a stream, I can only move 2. I'm going to move, I got 2 infantry here, so I'm going to move them up, and they'll engage. Now we'll see how this works. I'm going to resolve across here. So I have, morale. Okay, now remember, these took some damage, so they're a 1. So before they can do anything, I might want to see how they do here for morale. So morale checks are the first step of battle turns. For each engaged 1-step unit, roll a die 6. Okay, so I'm going to roll for this infantry here. Roll my dice. Oh, I got a 1. That's great. 1 means a unit has bad morale. It must make a disengaged battle move, perhaps causing a rout. Nope, it doesn't cause a rout, but it just disengages. Units in square and foot artillery are eliminated, so they're not in square and it's not a foot artillery. So they get scared and they pull back. Let's roll for that one. They roll a 6. They're good. Now, they can stay. Now, what does that mean? It could cause a rout. Well, remember, if this was reversed, if we were in the French side and this cannon, for whatever reason, let's say that was infantry, but if these guys had both failed their morale and they were both disengaged, that would leave only 1 enemy unit all by himself in a particular section of the map, which would then cause the entire army to rout. So that's why you want to try and reinforce things when you can, do reinforcements. So this disengaged, but he remains to fight. So he would attack, so we'll just attack. 1 dice, so strength of 1, with a firepower of 2, so I hit on a 1 or 2. Did no damage. Okay, that's not working out. I moved 2 infantry across there, now engaged with this infantry. They each have a strength of 3. This one hits on 2s, this one hits on 1s. Now because they have a different firepower, I usually roll them separate. So the one that's got 2, okay, the firepower 2 guy does nothing. The firepower 1 infantry unit rolls, he does nothing as well. So all those 2 corps worth of infantry do nothing. But see now, if we had eliminated that, I would have caused the British to rout. Didn't happen. Okay. Alright, now over here, I have a chance. I've got my 2 infantry that I moved up and 1 infantry. So this is strength 4 at firepower 1. Let me grab one more dice. Come on, 1s. Let's get a nice good roll. Well, I did roll 1, 1. I rolled that off to the side to get a nice good dice bounce. The rest of those were misses. So they drop. So they were hit earlier by a cannon, then they got hit by infantry. Then I have a strength of 3 with firepower 1, so I'll roll 3 dice. And that scored no hits as well. Alright, so all my fire is done. Done. And then I would check for reinforcements from additional towns, which the French, they have no adjacent towns, so they couldn't reinforce that battle. I would move on to the next battle if I, well, we would do the British here before we move on to the next battle. So let's do the British. So I have to now decide where do I want to reinforce. This side is looking weak. Let's move here. This side is kind of, only 1 defender, so we'll move up 1. And cannons cannot move to engage, so they're going to stay right there. Now, unfortunately, they can't shoot long range either, so they're just off the map. So now my British have reinforced themselves from the reinforcement, and they would check. So he's got 2 strength, and he would roll 2 dice, and they are firepower 2, so they hit on 2s. So they had no hits. So this British Corps, nothing. This one has 4 dice, and it also has firepower 2. All right, British must have really good muskets, but very bad rolls. Okay, well, 5s and 6s. I got these out of my Warhammer box. Those you want to roll high on. Okay, so that side is done. We go to the center. He's got 4 dice, all firepower of 2. Nothing. I rolled 4s and 5s. Then the firepower 3 rolls on F1. Firepower 1, hit on 1s. Nothing. All right, great. Then we have the cannon. Cannon gets their first shot there. It is going to be buckshot. So they have 3. They're going to hit on firepower. Now, real quick on the artillery. That's just the first shot of the game, I think, of that battle. Woo! I just bumped the camera. You just got a quick zoom in on the map, I'm sure. Like, what was that? Let me check the artillery again. Artillery, but not in position engaged. Short range to reflect the first fire only. Yeah, see, so they already did a close up. So they're hitting on firepower 2. And artillery missed nothing. Wow, 5s and 6s and 4s. These must be weighted dice. I'm going to keep those definitely for Warhammer. Okay, so that would have been a French. And then the British, because remember, I've got reinforcements over here. I could bring across the minor road 1 more infantry. And across this minor road, 1 more infantry. I remember this time because it's a minor road. And now we're seeing a lot more British than French. I would have to start thinking about a battle of attrition where the French just keep pressing, or I might start thinking about bringing the French back to disengage, and then they can actually start to retreat away from the battle. And you retreat the same way you reinforce. I would have to leave like 2 units out through a major road, 1 unit out through a minor road, through adjacent towns. And usually it's to the towns that you attacked from. So I'd have to go back. In this example here, we attacked from Luz and from Mons. So I'd have to bring, well, actually they're lucky. That's a major road. A major road to Mons and a minor road to Luz. So I could have 1 guy retreat. But this they could probably keep fighting. Okay, so what does all of this mean? This is where the game, takes time to play, right? If you just move and if you quickly did combat, the game probably would go pretty quickly. But what takes time now is the tactical battle. And actually what can take time is setting up how to position your troops so they can participate in battle. And again, I'm just going to reinforce and reiterate the fact that this game is really all about personnel management, where you put them on the strategic map in order to support each other, so that when the battle starts, as you can see, the British went from not a very strong presence on the map, but because they had set up a support network behind them from a couple of adjacent towns, they were able to feed units into that battle. Now, if things did go bad for one side or the other and you retreat, well, one thing is you can't retreat into another battle. So if I actually had two battles going on in adjacent towns, I couldn't say, oh wow, that battle's starting to look kind of bad. Let me retreat some units out so they could go help fight in another battle. No, once these guys retreat out, they're done until all the battles are done and you can move them again. So there's just, like I said, lots of little things that you have to keep in mind and remember. But once you have it, and you know, if you make little mistakes, you just got to go back and fix it. But the thing is, it's a game that really requires you to think about how you want to maneuver your troops. And that's a really good element that I don't see in a lot of games. Like I said, when I first started playing this, I really played it like a tactical game where I'm just moving units up and attacking and shooting into the towns. But there's a lot more to it than that. You want to really think about where my escape routes could be in case I have to retreat, and then how am I going to support these battles with reinforcements. That's why I said it's very cool that if you have a battle going on here at Waterloo, you would want to have your Prussians over here for reinforcements, or a couple units over here in Hal, and then you'd have your main body here, and then of course if you had the British, they might want to have some troops over here so they could reinforce themselves as well. And all of that would play into the game, because if I started attacking the British here at Waterloo, then the Allied player at some point would be able to start slowly bringing in Prussian reserves, and that might just turn the tide. So can you recreate history here? You can. You just have to set it up. Well, I think that covers the gist of the game. That covers all the major talking points there. And I know, I'm sorry if that seems a little disjointed. It's just that I really don't know what to say other than you have to play this game from the point of view of how do I support my other troops? You know, how do I keep the cities adjacent to one another so I can effectively run an offensive, campaign? But that leads us to the victory conditions then. So now that you're managing your troops, you're rolling dice for the combat, you're taking losses, maybe you're routing. They even have rules here for stalemates in case the attacker doesn't attack for a while. There's your commander units. They will give you some bonuses. But how do you win? That's the victory condition. We didn't talk about the Allied supply. There's also some supply rules here. So just, not to go too in depth, but there's a chance that it says at the end of every French turn, and that are resolved. Basically, if I have French units in Ghent, Brussels, or Liege, then the Allies could suffer some losses because they're losing supplies to the troops. So there's a little supply rule system there as well. But for the victory condition, so now that I know, I have to be very careful how I move things, how I engage. The victory conditions. So for the French, if they defeat both Allied armies before the time expires, so the Anglo-Dutch army is defeated when 8 or more units are eliminated, and then the Prussian are eliminated if they lose 9 or more units are eliminated. So we would actually, that's a lot of combat the French would have to do. Now the French also win if they are undefeated and occupy any of 2 Brussels, Ghent, or Liege after French turn of June 22nd. So that'd be the end of the game. And then the French also win if all 3 armies are simultaneously defeated. So, there's the victory condition. Now the Allies, okay, so they win if they defeat the French army by eliminating 12 or more units, and then they also win if the French fail to win more. So yeah, the French can push up, capture a few cities, or just destroy a lot of units. Whew. So again, not a complicated game to learn. A few things to try and remember so you don't make mistakes like I did, but otherwise the complexity comes from management. I think that's pretty much all I've got to say about this. I hope that didn't sound like repeating myself too much. I feel like I did say troop management quite a bit, but I feel that's where the strongest point of the game is. And the rest of it is also important, but what really makes that shine though is making sure you've got the chess and your several moves ahead of your opponent, or if you solo play, just spend a lot of time just trying to maneuver to where you can support everything. That's pretty much it. Thanks for tuning in. And, if you want to see maybe some more example plays, let me know. But I think we pretty much covered all you need to know about Napoleon. And hopefully I explained a little bit of why I really like this system. And if you haven't played it before, I highly recommend it. All right, thanks a lot. Bye-bye.